Hello valued viewers, I hope you're all doing wonderfully well. Today we're in the F-15E and we're looking at the AAQ-14 LANTIRN targeting pod. It is an IR pod with laser ranger and laser designator. It can just be equipped on this station here. I'm going to spend most of this video on active pause. The aircraft will be still, but the T-pod will still operate. First, the control panel for the T-pod is in the rear seat, so press 2 to get into the rear seat, and here is the panel. The power switch can be off, standby or on. From off we will start in standby, where the T-pod will be prepared for between 5 to 8 minutes according to the documentation. In my testing it was more like 2 minutes. Then it can go to on and be operated. In standby the T-pod is stowed, which will be used for takeoff and landing. Also our laser, it can be safe or armed, and we're going to keep it in the armed position. We also have manual gain and level knobs, currently not modelled. And for making this video I have to decide whether to show you it in the rear cockpit or the front cockpit, and both can use the T-pod pretty much equally. There are a couple more commands available in the rear, but there's almost nothing in it, so I've decided to show it from the front cockpit. For the front seat, auto acquisition switch forward, short press cycles field of view. Long press sets snowplow mode. Aft, short, returns to queue. Long press toggles space stabilization on and off. Press toggles track on and off. Left multifunction switch fires the laser. We also have our TDC commands, up, down, left and right, or the equivalent slews, which will slew the T-pod left, down, up and right, and TDC press to designate. Coolie up short will quick step between our sequence points. Boat aft short will cancel our designation, and finally castle left, aft and right will allow us to assign SOI or command to either of our front screens. Those are the controls for the front seat, and I will endeavour to show them all off. The rear seat has a different set of controls, and I will flick them up on the screen now. The T-pod can be shown on any of the screens, front or rear, and in fact it can actually be shown on all of the screens. So menu, T-pod, menu, T-pod, menu, T-pod. If I were to control the T-pod on either of these screens, all will be updated. So why don't we assign SOI or command to the left screen? So castle, left, long. We now have command on the left screen, and if I were to move it about, all screens move. Pretty cool, huh? If I were to send command to the lower screen with castle aft, I'm now moving the lower screen, which moves all of the others. Let's go back to the left screen. Let's start with base T-pod symbology. I'm just going to slew the T-pod around, and assuming that we have SOI or command assigned to the screen, we just use our TDC left, right, up or down. I'm just moving it to somewhere that looks nice and clear. There, that will do. Starting top left, azimuth, and a number shows the relative azimuth that the T-pod is pointing in relation to our aircraft. 0 means that in azimuth it's pointing directly forward. If I were to slew left, in degrees, 4 degrees left or right, 3 degrees right. Below that is elevation, same kind of thing. Currently 26 degrees down, 24 degrees down, and so on. Associated with that azimuth and elevation is the calculated slant range from our aircraft to where the T-pod is pointing on the terrain in nautical miles. There are 3 different modes. SLR means that slant range is computer calculated. We could also have a laser range, which is more accurate and will be measured in feet, or an air-to-ground radar range, also measured in feet. The default is going to be our computed slant range. Next, our CDES option can be unboxed or boxed. It refers to how we designate a target. We'll go through it properly later, but very quickly, if it's unboxed, it is non-continuous. This means that when we designate a target, designation information will be sent from the T-pod to the aircraft when I command a designation from where the T-pod is pointing at that exact moment. If I box it, it is now in continuous designation mode, which means that when I command a designation, every time I move the T-pod, it will update that designation. It'll make sense when I show off the designations. Next, gain options not modelled. Next, polarity. Do I want the heat to show as white or green in this case, or do I want it to show as black? So inverse polarity. Obviously white shows properly on the color display. Next, we're currently in air to ground mode, but there is an air to air mode, but it's currently not modeled, so we'll skip it. Next, more designation information. If I designate via the TPOD, do I want it to create a target point, a queue, a mark point, an update, or do nothing at all? Currently modeled are target and mark. Next, when we create a track, which is not the same thing as a designation, do we want to try and track white or black or an automatic interpolation? Tracks are all based on this raster image. It searches for the color or intensity of the pixels. Regarding tracks, which type of track do we want to achieve? An area track, a point track, or computed? An area track means that the TPOD will attempt to track a piece of terrain. A point track attempts to track an object, again done via the contrast of the raster image. That object could be moving like a vehicle or static like a house or a telegraph pole. Finally, computed is an automatic mode which the system will go into if an area track or a point track is no longer possible. Like for instance, if we get the wing of our aircraft in the way of this image, which happens all the time by the way, it will set itself to computer mode where it tries to maintain the track as best it can until area track or point track can be restored. Next, we have our bullseye information showing that from the current TPOD location, bullseye is a bearing of 259 for an amazing 1797 nautical miles. Next, I think we'll jump here. Current laser status. Why don't we talk about the laser for a bit? L shows that the laser is armed and ready to fire. If I were to press multifunction switch left, it now starts lasing and you can see that L is flashing. Press it again, we're no longer lasing. If it was M, it would mean that the laser is masked, probably by a part of our aircraft, which again is a common annoying feature. Why don't we stay on laser for a bit? Note that when I laze, the range here is no longer computed slant range, it's now laser range in feet, much more accurate, 45,728 feet, calculated via laser. Also, our laser status shown up here changes to laze and flashes, showing that we're lasing. When we're not lasing, it shows our basic status as arm. To show arm, it has to qualify 4 stipulations. 1, that the switch is armed in the rear seat. 2, that we've got a valid laser code set, we'll go over that in a minute. 3, that the gear is up and weight on wheels switch is off. And 4, most importantly, that we are flying below 25,000 feet. Speaking about laser codes, it's shown here. Our default is 1688. It can be between 1111 and 1788, and I'm not sure if every combination is possible. If we wanted to change it, we would go to our scratch pad here and type in a valid code. Let's go 1788, press here, laser code has changed. While we're on the topic of lasers, if we look on the right here, we can see that our laser is armed because the rear switch is on. Also, you've seen me lasing manually here. Automatic lasing functions are available and they will be shown in weapons videos. Maybe just one thing to mention as well, that the laser in this TPOD has a range of 13.2 nautical miles. Let's carry on Symbology. Next, recorder. The real aircraft can record each of the screens and that would set the recorder going, obviously not modelled. Next one, I probably should have said at the beginning. We have 2 modes we can have this TPOD in, T1 or T2. T1 is the basic operations mode. T2 is a setup mode where we can set some various stuff up, but at the moment it's not modelled. Next, field of view. We might want to kind of zoom in to get some more detail on the target. There are 3 fields of view: wide, narrow, and expanded narrow. I'll flick up on the screen information now about the zoom levels of each field of view. To cycle between those field of views, we use auto acquisition forward short. So if I would press it, I would go from wide to narrow. Press it again, you go back to wide. While in wide, you will see what will be shown in narrow because we've got these little black corners. So if I were to go to narrow, that's what's boxed. If I want to get to expanded, the closest field of view, I will click on expanded here, and you can see from narrow we get another box here, press it again, auto acquisition forward short, and we're now in expanded. The way it works, we understand, is that wide field of view is an optical zoom, narrow is an optical zoom, expanded is a digital zoom. So there will be some fuzziness associated with it. Going to go back to wide and cancel expanded. Next, geographic information about where the TPOD is pointing on the terrain, which is in the center of the cursor, obviously. An associated lat, long, which I believe is 3-digit minutes, and an elevation, ASL, in feet. If I were to move the TPOD about, obviously that will update when I stop slewing. Next, a declutter function which gets rid of some of the symbology, which will help you view the image. Next, this queue here, I'm going to call our situational awareness queue. That's not actually what it's called in the Strike Eagle, but that's what it's called in most other aircraft, and it keeps it uniform and easy to understand. That shows, relative to our aircraft, where the TPOD is pointing. If it was up here, it's pointing directly forwards and level. Here, directly downwards. Here, directly aft and level. Here, left and level, right and level, and interpolate anywhere in between. So you can see if I move the TPOD, you can see it moves there. Also, we have a cardinal north here in relation to where our TPOD is pointing. So, as you can see, we move the TPOD about. It shows you where cardinal north is. Also, when I'm slewing about, look at the bottom left of the screen. You can see an arrow and a letter appears. That shows which way I'm commanding the TPOD to slew, and by how much, what intensity. Intensity A is low when it goes up to A, B, C and D, depending on how hard I push on the slew control. Next option here is our Q modes. There are several Q modes, and we're going to look at all that are available at the moment in early access. The 3 base Q modes are ground stabilization, space stabilization and snowplow mode. Ground stabilization means that the TPOD will be stabilized and fixed to a point on the ground. That's what we are in now. If we just see an SP on its own, then it means it's in ground stabilization. Space stabilization means that it's not locked to the ground. It means that we can still move it about, but it will float above the ground as my aircraft moves over the ground. And finally, snowplow means that the TPOD is locked into a position facing directly forwards and slightly down. I'm going to try to show you that now. So if I were to unpause, I'll just set my autopilot on, otherwise I'll crash. So unpausing, autopilot, hold, on, let it do its thing. So you can see that we're in ground stabilization now. Therefore, wherever I fly the aircraft, the TPOD is stabilizing to the ground. If I were to press, I can actually repause it now. If I were to go to space stabilization mode, and there are various ways of getting into it, I could, for instance, push and hold auto acquisition aft for more than 1 second, or I could type 0 in the scratch pad and then press on that button there. In this case, I'm going to do auto acquisition aft long. We're now in space stabilization mode, where I can move the TPOD about, but it's no longer stabilized to the ground, just to the aircraft. And finally, auto acquisition forward long, more than 1 second, will put us into snowplow mode, where it fixes this directly in front of the aircraft. You can see azimuth is 0 and elevation is 2 degrees down. Space stabilization is toggleable, and we can deselect it again with auto acquisition aft long. Back in ground stabilization, let's just find something a bit more interesting as I slew down. We're now stabilized again to the ground. Those are our 3 main Q types. Our next Q type is going to be air-to-ground radar, which is super cool. So I'm going to just zoom out here. I'm going to get our air-to-ground radar up on another screen. I'm going to make it soy, assign command to it via castle right long. I'm now going to slew our cursor over here. I'm going to put it to Q mode. And I'm going to TDC press and watch the TPOD. Pang, it now moves to the Q set by the air-to-ground radar. Let's move the air-to-ground radar over here and create Q. Or over here. Or over here. And we can see that we're in radar mode because we're in SP, ground stabilized to radar. Next is NavQ. This allows us to slew the TPOD to any of our current sequence points. Let's just show you where our sequence points are. The sequence points we have at the moment are 4 steer points. You might know them as waypoints. We have one roughly near where that tank is, or that ground vehicle. Steer point 2 is in the middle of Cairo International. Steer point 3 is on that TU-22. And steer point 4 is in the pyramids. There are 3 different ways of accessing these nav queues. Either on the scratch pad, type in the number you want. So I want to go in the middle of Cairo International, so that's steer point 2. Click on there. You can see we're now in nav queue mode and we're at steer point 2 in the middle of there. Or I can actually just push on this button here and it will cycle between them. So there, we're now on nav steer point 3. And I might want to zoom in, so let's go and zoom in. Oh, I need to assign soy, so castle left long. Auto acquisition forward. Ta-da, there's my backfire. Or another way to do it is to push coolie up short with this screen as soy, and ta-da, we're now at 4, we're now at the pyramids. Now if I were to wander away from that steer point and I want to get back to it, I can press auto acquisition aft short and it will send us back to our queue, which is ping steer point 4. Next, I want to start showing off the tracks and the designations. So I've got an area set up just in front of the aircraft. I want to get to steer point 1 there, and I'm going to zoom out to wide field of view, and typically there's a cloud in the way, but we'll do the best we can. So I'm just going to slew around and look for some points of interest around here. There must be something around here. Yeah, okay, I can see through the clouds. Some clouds are a thing, obviously. Clouds will interrupt the TPOD. I can see something down there to play with. So I want to attain a track. A track is not a designation. A track will not allow you to drop a bomb on something directly. For that you need a designation. It is literally asking the TPOD to track something on the raster image. First we want area track, and for our roleplay I found down there some pylons. I don't want to track the pylon itself, instead I actually want to track the terrain just east of that pylon, there. So I make sure area track is selected here, which it is. Then with this screen command, soy, I press auto acquisition press. Done. It's now boxed area track. I now have an area track on that piece of terrain, which it will keep until I tell it otherwise, or something goes wrong, like my wing gets in the way, or there's other multitude of things that actually happen when you're using a TPOD. Untrack, I press auto acquisition press again, and the track is now gone. If I want to track an actual object, a house or a pylon or a tank or something, I go to point track. I now maneuver myself over the thing. In fact, I'm going to try and find that vehicle to show you that point track also works with moving things. So let's go and try and find him. He's here somewhere and I may need some help trying to find him. Remember, this is IR, so we're looking for a heat signature of a moving thing. There he is, got him. Right, so you can see it's white. Out of interest, if I chose black hot, he'll be black. Okay, we're going to try and get a point track on this guy now, so I'm going to zoom in. This can be really awkward, by the way. I'll probably make it look fairly easy, but it's always awkward. I want to tell the system what to try and track. Do I want it to find white? Do I want it to find black? Do I want it automatic? I'm going to ask for white, or green in this case, but white, you know what I mean. Put the guy in the crosshair. Point track's already selected, and push auto acquisition press now. Got him, first time, wow. Rarely does it work, first time viewers. You'll have to mess around with this guy here, you'll have to mess around with this guy here, and usually mess around with your zoom. Do all those things and eventually you'll get the point track. Remember, it doesn't see the actual 3D object, it just sees the raster image. It needs to see enough pixels of enough colour to get the track. Again, this is just a point track, it's not a designation, so we can't drop a bomb on him yet, but we are now tracking that guy. I'm going to untrack now with ping auto acquisition press. We're now untracked. Next, I want to show the designations. We should really use them with a track, so I'm going to track that area, I don't know, over here, west of the pylon. I'm going to go area track, and I'm going to auto acquisition press. I'm now tracking that bit of terrain. I can designate a target, or I can designate a mark point. Let's start with target. Air to ground mode. With my CDES not boxed, I am going to zoom out so you can see the HUD. With this screen soy or command, I press TDC press to designate. Ping, done. designate will show here for 5 seconds, pod will now show here, and on the HUD, if you can read that, it now says I have a target, and that target is 3.5 miles away. If I were to move the TPOD, that will not update. That target is now stored in memory. Now that will change if I box CDES, continuous designation. If I were to designate again, now, with TDC press, it's got its new target point now. But now if I were to move the TPOD about, slew it, every time I stop slewing, it updates the target position. So that's what boxing CDES actually does. Okay, I'm going to turn CDES off. That's how I designate a target. Now, how you go and put a bomb on that target will be included in the bombing videos. Next, I would like to show mark points. So, I could select mark here, and I do exactly the same thing. I press TDC press, and I create mark point 0. It's created at this time. That lat and long, which matches the TPOD, obviously, and that elevation. In fact, why don't I show a slightly more tactical use of this? Why don't I go and find something to mark? I'm going to find a thing. Everyone likes a thing. There we go, there's a thing. This is this industrial site I do not like the look of, and it needs to be marked for my friend to go and look at. So, I want that guy there. TDC press, mark point 1. That guy there, mark point 2. That point there, mark point 3. I'm then going to send that mark point information for my friend to go and put bombs on or whatever. Actually using the mark points we'll cover in a different navigation video, but that's how we can create them from the TPOD. The only other thing I can think of showing is that using boat switch aft will undesignate our currently designated target there, which I'm going to try pressing now. Pang, we've now undesignated that target and we can redesignate. That shows the functionality of the AAQ-14 at early access on late May 2023. Other functions will of course come, but those are the core functions we have. Go and use it and bomb stuff.